Howdy, I'm Helgast. Have you ever had a favorite franchise that used to get an alright amount of games through console generations, only for it to disappear? For me, this was the Ace Combat franchise, which had a drought of 6 years before getting Ace Combat 7. But that's only counting the side games, because if we don't, there was a 13-year gap between 6 and 7. So let's jump right into the disaster report to see how Ace Combat ended up like this. Before discussing how the series would crash into an oily fire, we're looking through the franchise's history for some context. The series started in 1993 with Namco's arcade game called Air Combat, the first 3D plane flying game that showed the industry that you don't need to be a simulator. It did well in arcades, and Namco would keep with a tradition, porting successful arcade games to the PlayStation, and Air Combat was the same, until it was decided it would be called Ace Combat in Japan. I'm assuming it helped sales in Japan, as the game would remain Air Combat everywhere else. Development for the PS1 port would have development problems due to the limitations of the PS1, causing for the game to take a drastic hit in the graphics department, which can be easily seen when you compare it to other PS1 games, and it was heavily criticized for this at the time. But the team knew about this problem, and sort of created a middle ground to excuse the graphics. Instead of a straight port, they would use the additional space on the disc to expand the amount of content. It was a highlight for the time, and it showed as the game would sell 600,000 copies in Japan on its first week. A great success for Japan, as the series would dwindle with each entry. For years this remained as the best-selling Ace Combat, selling over 2 million copies worldwide by 2008. The success of Air Combat greenlit a sequel, and this would come with a good amount of changes. For starters, the game would be known as Ace Combat 2 worldwide, which had to confuse Western audiences. The dev team wanted to show the lessons they learned from Air Combat, as both graphics and gameplay would get an overhaul. For starters, to understand the limitations of the PlayStation better, the dev team would make a graphical test to fit as many polygons on the screen as possible without straining the system. Knowing the limits allowed them to push the visuals, creating a far better looking game. While on the gameplay side, the team started to push for the aircraft to feel believable while staying in their arcadey feel. Their solution was to create a basic physics system that gave the aircraft weight while keeping the agile speed the game had going. Even though a lot was changed and improved, the game would only sell 500,000 copies in its first week in Japan. Worldwide, the game would sell over 1 million copies. I'm assuming the lower sales comes from the name change that happened worldwide, leading to fewer sales, but it was still considered a success, allowing for the series to continue. I'm surprised the series moved past the PS1, because Ace Combat 3 could have been the nail in the coffin for the series, as Ace Combat 3 was highly ambitious in what it wanted to do. It accomplished everything it wanted to do to an extent. The Japanese version had a branching story with multiple endings, and cutscenes to flesh out the world. The multiple paths and endings brought the mission count up to 52. This introduced the iconic radio chatter between pilots. The game had so much content to the point where it was a proper 2-disc game. This brought the series to new heights, literally, as there's a space mission. It could have been the dream Ace Combat game, but that's only the Japanese version, as the team blew too much money on the Japanese version. Or more realistically, there was too much content to actually translate, so the publisher Namco needed to make cuts for the international release. Now Namco went the nuclear option, as the game would only release on 1 disc, meaning the branching story was cut. Voice acting was gone, most of the cutscenes gone. The most that you got was some exposition text, as Namco apparently saved a lot of money by canceling the game's localization, which was apparently the same team that localized Metal Gear Solid. Another cost-saving effort was to make a limited marketing campaign, and the game would flop. It would just barely manage to crawl past 1 million copies sold worldwide. We move on to the next generation with the PlayStation 2. Nowadays, when a game doesn't sell well, it just turns into a live service trash, where companies expect gamers to piss and shit whenever they fix a broken game. Or the franchise and sometimes the development team gets quietly snuffed out. Even with dwindling sales, the Ace Combat series wouldn't see either of these fates. Instead, the dev team would simplify everything they learned with 3, so all versions could get a complete game, as cutscenes would be more of a slideshow style to be cost effective. The game is even more focused on being arcadey than the previous ones, emphasizing getting high scores. The music would be less inspired by Top Gun and would have more of an orchestraic and synthesizer music. It also would start the iconic Latin chanting in the skies. To not have any ties to the branching endings from Ace Combat 3 or the other games, the devs decided to just flat out reboot the series, along with a big marketing push to let consumers know that this is a rebooted series, so that anyone can just jump on in. These improvements and being on the PS2 let Ace Combat 4 become the best selling in the franchise for decades, selling a whopping 2.64 million copies, and immediately greenlighting Ace Combat 5's development. Ace Combat 5's development must have been more relaxed versus 4, since the dev team didn't have to prove that the series was profitable. So the dev team built upon Ace Combat 4, bringing in a more in-depth story that allows players to slightly influence it with the wingman mechanic. While at certain moments your squad mates ask a yes or no question for you. While on the gameplay front, you can give simple orders to the AI, like having them cover you, fire at will, disperse, or restrict the use of special weapons. While the split screen was taken out due to a tight deadline, the game brought an arcade mode. This was a prequel to Ace Combat 4 and has a lot of replayability. The cutscenes saw an upgrade of being FMVs instead of still images. The music is fantastic and it would sell 1.8 million copies, and from here we would start seeing the downfall of the series. Ace Combat 5 still got good sales, which allows for the dev team to start developing on 2 games at the same time. Ace Combat 0 would be the last hurrah for the PS2 era, while a next-gen Xbox 360 title was also in development. For 0, the team would do the same as 5, with them just building upon it. The game was great, but brought barely any new features, as all of those were saved for Ace Combat 6. The game would release in 2006, only for the PS2, which was a problem. This was the same year as the PS3 would come out. This was the year the PS3 came out, and for such a big franchise to only stay back in the PS2, a lot of people probably thought that there would be a PS3 version and waited, which wasn't happening due to them already making 2 different games, so putting development time for the much harder to develop for PS3 was off the table. This caused for the game to sell only 800,000 copies worldwide, and it's the second worst selling Ace Combat. Have you ever had an identity crisis? Because Ace Combat was in the starting phase of its own, as Ace Combat 6 would be announced to be a 360 exclusive. The reason was the devs wanted to get some experience on the new consoles, which brought a problem that the dev team wasn't expecting. This being the 6th mainline installment to a series exclusively to the PlayStation is a hard sell for players. This is due to the devs or publisher not porting any of the older Ace Combat games onto the Xbox 360. But launching in 2007 also had some fucking brutal competition, as we would see Halo 3, Bioshock, and motherfucking Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. Plus, fans that didn't buy an Xbox 360 and stuck with the PlayStation probably didn't think that they were missing much, since the last 3 games made such minor improvements between each entry. Even though Ace Combat 6 pulled out all the stops to make an actual next-gen experience, bringing full cutscenes, dynamic missions, a slightly more in-depth wingman mechanic, and zero-G turning, which allowed you to essentially drift past missiles. Plus, the game would support the idea of a living battlefield to emphasize the speed of the player's aircraft, as plumes of smoke allow you to truly see how fast you're going, while having plenty of other supporting troops to really give the illusion of a battle. Being on the 360 in 2007, there would be online play in both PvP and co-op play. It's a great package, and it's held back by rather dumb restrictions, and with HD development increasing costs, selling only 700,000 copies worldwide caused for Bandai Namco to hit the panic button, as they would start questioning the series' profitability again. For the next title, the devs really needed to brainstorm to make a significant difference, bringing us to Ace Combat Assault Horizon. Ace Combat Assault Horizon is the black sheep in the franchise, and the changes made are due directly to Ace Combat 6's poor sales. But the big brains at Namco started to do something right for once, as this would be the first multi-platform game in the series. It's a fucking surprise that it took them this long, especially due with the massive dwindling sales between entries. However, when looking for innovation to keep the series going, the dev team had another big brain at Bandai Namco say every gamer's worst nightmare at the time, that the team should target the FPS crowd, mainly pointing out the Call of Duty crowd. I get the logic because COD has such a massive fan base, but with every game trying to do this, the devs seem to have forgotten something, is that the Call of Duty crowd doesn't just play anything that looks like Call of Duty. I wonder if any of the devs had a seeking feeling about this game after hearing that Homefront, the next big Call of Duty game, flopped so hard that it's one of the main reasons that THQ died. Assault Horizon's immediate changes were that the game was a lot faster. These speeds might have made dogfighting a mild challenge, but have no fear, as Assault Horizon has a mechanic called dogfight mode that puts you on rails so you don't have to worry about missing or controlling your plane, or doing any of the cool maneuvers yourself like you would do in Ace Combat. Another push was having all these camera angles but showing the aircrafts being destroyed, where they would bend metal and throw oil up everywhere to make it look like it was bleeding. I wonder if this is supposed to try to mimic like the kill cam, which is something that's not even written in the script. I just kind of thought about that now. But it's the one aspect of Assault Horizon that I really like. It visually looks great, but the gameplay is really bad for Ace Combat. But from seeing some reviews from players that aren't Ace Combat fans, the changes to the gameplay did work. It did appeal to the FPS crowd, as you can see a lot of different reviews from players that don't tend to play Ace Combat games really enjoy this. All it costed was alienating the entire series' core fans. But I don't want to give the devs too much shit, because making a game to save a franchise has to be a big challenge. But when you have a mission that is directly out of Call of Duty, you might have gone too far in one direction. The game would also crawl over 1 million copies, and it brings us to the oddest entry, Ace Combat Infinity. Infinity is one of the games ever. It's one of the few Ace Combat games I've never played. Well, I didn't even know that this game existed until a year or two ago. This game really feels like a weird experiment to gauge interest from the fan base in Namco. The game would be announced through Twitter tweets throughout 2013, and would release in May 2014 as a PS3 exclusive. Why? Why would you put a series that just started to go multi-platform and make it an exclusive again? Also, why the PS3 after the PS4 launched a year ago with no plans to port the game over? But this game also decided to bring a twist, as it would be the first and only free-to-play Ace Combat game, making the exclusivity deal on last-gen hardware that much more of an odd decision. But Infinity did well to the point where it greenlit the development of Ace Combat 7, which would have its own struggles, but we're not there yet. So there's probably wasn't enough time or manpower to actually do a porting job if they wanted to. Being a free-to-play game meant that the content would differ from the series. From what I can tell, the devs did make it work in this format, as the game did come with a campaign mode with 5 missions at launch. Throughout its lifespan, it would expand to 8 missions. These could be played solo or co-op, but would force you to deal directly with the free-to-play aspect. The game was on a timer mechanic, where you had a certain amount of energy to use for missions, then you had to wait a certain amount of time to get your energy back, or pay for this convenient extra energy. It was a $20 unlimited energy deal only for the campaign, so you could bypass that. While playing earns you credits, and it works like other games where you have to buy planes and weapons. That's just a little bit more slower than those. The game brought co-op mode, which was just you and some buddies or randoms versus bots. But digging around, people enjoy this as the AI provided a decent challenge. The main appeal was the PvP, which was team deathmatch matches. It was weak on content for Ace Combat, but with it being free to play, players didn't really mind the lack of content, but many did not like the energy system. You tended to have a small amount of energy, where you'd get 5 free matches a day, but you could complete challenges to get more, but most players had to deal with low energy after that. It didn't help that in 2016, the devs added a mechanic called the Force Sortie, which increases rewards per energy used. So you had the choice to either go in with 1 energy, or you could use 6 energy to get better rewards. This isn't like a slight increase, as 1 energy doubles the rewards, and putting 6 energy into it gives you 7 times the rewards. It speeds up the grind quite a bit, which is weird to say for a free-to-play game, but the game couldn't hold a fan base because it was stuck on the PS3. The servers would be shut down in 2018, which was around the same time when Ace Combat 7's release was closing in. Like half of this franchise's life, Ace Combat 7 was another game where they had to create a great selling game where the franchise would die. Except this time, Namco was being serious about this, especially since early development wasn't going well. The team was having problems with the Ace Combat engine, but after seeing the success of Tekken 7 with the Unreal Engine 4, they would move away from the Ace Combat engine for Unreal. This change was brought to a higher up where they asked the team if they could actually finish this game, or if they should just cancel and move on to an entirely new project. The team would ask, and was granted to be able to finish the game, and their first move was to scrap everything they did and start over to create an absolute love letter to the series. They would look back at the past and take everything that they knew fans really liked about the franchise and put it in, and it was praised critically and financially when it released. Namco recently announced that the game has sold over 4 million copies, and is currently the best-selling Ace Combat game in the entire franchise. The series is still continuing, as Namco has also confirmed that the next Ace Combat game is in development. That's the story of how Ace Combat sort of self-imploded on itself. I did enjoy making this video, and I plan on making this a series. However, I'm still determining on what I'm going to tackle next, as well as writing down notes of what I can improve for these videos. But if you have any suggestions of a game that either had development struggles or the series just randomly disappeared, let me know, as that will give me inspiration for future videos. Until then, have a fantastic day.